Hey, it's Mark Maxwell, and welcome back for another production tutorial. Today we'll be working in Kick 2, a simple yet versatile drum synth from Sonic Academy. While the name Kick 2 suggests that this plugin was designed exclusively for making kicks, you might be surprised to learn that it has everything you need for making perfectly sculpted snares. However, I'm not gonna lie, snares are tricky. But today we're gonna take all the trickiness out of it, and I'll show you how to turn a snare like this into a snare like this. By the way, all the synth presets you hear in today's featured tutorial track are from my new series of preset packs, Future Funk Volumes 1 and 2 for SERUM and VITAL. Make sure to check them out via the links below. First, let's take a look at the interface. What we have in front of us is the subchannel, and this is essentially like a sine wave that has a pitch envelope, and if I remove some of these nodes, you can hear what I'm talking about, kind of that analog style drum synth. And then we have 3 clicks, which are samples that we can layer on top to complete the sound. If we look at the bottom, we have the pitch envelope, obviously, for the subchannel. And I should say here that the pitch envelope is only for the subchannel. It doesn't have any effect on the click channels whatsoever. We have an amp envelope for the sub, and then an amp envelope for the 3 clicks. Down here at the bottom, we have our EQ, which is a 4-band EQ. It has a parametric mode as well. Distortion, drive, basic compressor, and some sub-control, which is like waveform shaping, adding some harmonics and such to the sine wave to give it more character. A couple other things we want to note here. On the left, we have a pitch slider, and we can drag it up or down, and this gives us the overall range of pitch for the pitch envelope. Let's just go ahead and max it out. So we're at 20 kilohertz and we have the full spectrum. Down here at the bottom is the length slider, and this gives us the overall length of the drum sound. Let's leave this at 600. Before we jump in and start making the sound, let's listen to the track that I'm working on and get a vibe for what kind of snare we'll be making today. As you can hear, there's no snare in there at the moment, and this track has just a nice kind of easy breezy, like disco pop feel to it. So I want a similar feel on the snare where we want something that has punch, that's full, but also has some of that sparkle to it. It's like not too harsh, and Kick 2 is actually really great for making snares just like that. Let's bring up the plugin again, and we'll start with the sub, which is gonna be the body of our snare. So we can think of this as like the actual snare drum. We can double click to create a node or double click to remove it. We're gonna need 4 here total. And as a good starting point for frequency, we'll start it right at the top at 20 kilohertz. And 200 hertz seems to be a really good, kind of just a sweet spot for snares. Like you wanna center it around that range. And then we're gonna do a slight decay to about 100. We'll see like 131. And then one last little dip to about 70 hertz. We can also adjust the slope by clicking and holding between 2 nodes. We'll give that a little bit of an exponential situation there. Let's bring that up a bit to like 230-ish. Nice, it's just got a nice little thunk to it. Let's go to our amp, and this is gonna be, once again, the amp envelope just for the sub. We don't need all this, so let's remove a couple of these nodes. And what we want to emulate is essentially what would happen with an acoustic snare drum, where the stick hits the skin, there's a slight delay, then those vibrations spread outward into the drum, and then we get that nice full sound to the snare. So we don't want to start the amp envelope right at the top like this. We want to give it some space. So let's scooch this over and look for a curve, more or less kind of like this. We can make it a little bit more dramatic than that. And this will just create more space between the transient and the body of the snare, which is always good. And then let's shorten the decay. Adjust that slope as well. Nice. Next, let's add some distortion to give it more presence. Bring it up to about 32%. We can drop the mix on that to 40% or so. And we can drop the drive as well, just a touch. If we go over to the subcontrol, we have from the dropdown some different options for harmonic content. If you go into skins, Snare 2 is good for this. I usually just use the drum skin. And then we can adjust the harmonic content of the sine wave. As you can hear, it kind of gives us more texture. Let's go to like 0.26, 0.27, somewhere in there. Awesome. And on the EQ, let me give you a little tip. So if you're tweaking the EQ and you notice that our high mids are nothing's happening here. Same on the highs. It's because they aren't activated yet. You have to go into parametric mode and then individually enable each band. We're only going to use low mids, and let's slide this frequency over to about 210. And we don't need to take out quite so much, maybe just like 5 dB. Great. Let's go ahead and drop the level on this as well, down to about -9, -10. By default, when you open up the program, it already has a click in here. It's click 12, that's what we're hearing. If we take this out, it's just the body. And we're gonna think of click 1 as our transient. So let's go into our dropdown, and if we go to live, and then live 34, this just gives us a really great kind of classic snare sort of transient. Let's bring up the level to like 1.7. And if we go into the amp envelope, we can make more adjustments. We're not going to do any crazy things with the amp slope, but I just want to bring this down to 0.5 so that the amplitude is centered. And you'll see why later. All right, awesome. Next, let's go into our second click, and we can think of this as the texture of the snare, or like the springs. We actually have a snare section, which is helpful. Snare noise 3 is really great. It's just a white noise splash, essentially. But that's not at all the sort of action that we want. We want to emulate the springs on a snare drum. And so once again, just like with the body of the snare, there's going to be a slight delay between the stick hitting the skin and then the springs being activated. So we'll need to add a couple nodes to get that going. Let's go ahead and double click. We're going to start it at 0 and bring this up to 0.5 and then bring this down to 0 at the end. Next, let's adjust the slope, make a more dramatic slope there. Do the same on this side. And let's take some of the decay off as well. Just a nice, tight, springy texture there. Sweet. I'm going to take a little bit off the level, just a touch. By the way, this little knob here at the bottom is your pan position. We're not going to mess with that at all today, but just so you know. All right, awesome. Now the tail. A little trick here. You can just use the same sample that you used for your texture or your springs, and we'll just process it slightly differently. We are, once again, going to add a couple nodes on our amp envelope. But we'll want a longer decay, so leave this third node here toward the end for now. Let's drop the level on it down to like 0.3-ish. And a tip here on our viewing options with the plugin. Right now, if you just click through on the bottom here, it'll just change the view to whatever layer you have activated. But up here, we can enable or disable the view for each individual layer so we can get like an overlay of each one together. And this is really great for seeing the overall shape of the sound and seeing how all these layers are interacting together. What we want to do is just look at click 2 and 3, our texture and our tail, to more or less shape them in a similar fashion so that we have a very similar attack and then this slightly longer decay. We want to adjust the curve here a bit, but not a ton. Let's go ahead and drop the level on that quite a bit to like -9, -10. A tip here on the tail. If we look at the controls, we have a combo filter. If we go to the left, it's low pass. If we go to the right, it's high pass. Our tail is essentially two things. You can think of it in two ways. The first way being like the bleed you would get from the close mics on your snare drum from the room, or you could think of it like the room mics themselves, where you could process them differently and just have that extra dimension to the snare itself. So we want to take out actually quite a bit of the low end, so we just get that nice kind of springy sparkle on the sound. Go up to about 0.7. And this also offers more distinction between our texture and our tail since they're the same sample. Yeah, that sounds really good. Another tip is if we go back to click 2, our texture, if you find that the texture and the tail are just kind of blending in together and you can't hear as much distinction, like that, which doesn't sound bad, try moving the decay back on your texture, on your springs, until you hear a little bit of a slap back effect. You'll hear that separation between texture and tail. Right there is really good. That's awesome. Next, the compressor. This is a super basic compressor, and that's all we really need. We just want to take a little bit off the top to add some extra bite to the sound. We'll drop the threshold just to like -6. Let's do a 5:1 on the ratio. I don't want to go too heavy. On the attack, let's give it, 7 or 8 milliseconds on the attack, a really, really sharp attack. And release, just go all the way down to the bottom. We want a very short release. Now on the makeup, let's look at the meter first. As you can see at the moment, we're a few dB below 0. We also have a limiter. If it's gray, it's disabled, and blue is enabled. Over to the right is the output level, which is post limiter. So on our makeup, we're going to bring this up just enough to clip. We don't want to get too much there, but just enough. So I'm at like 2.5 dB. Let's set our output level to -1. This is just a good standard for samples. Yeah, that sounded really good. A little tip on the velocity here. If you want velocity action, like for programming the drums, just slide this over and you can adjust the amount of velocity you have. I'm just gonna leave that at 0 so that everything's flat. Awesome, and I think this is ready to test out on the track. So let me just draw in really quick the snare drum on the 2 and 4 so we can kind of hear this back. And as far as the note goes for MIDI triggering, it doesn't matter. It's just the same across the board, so just draw them anywhere. All right, let's see what's up. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. All right, so what I want to do is just fine tune this to the track. And what's so great about having it in MIDI at first before we export it as audio is this will give us the chance to kind of really like listen back in real time, make adjustments in real time. So I'm just gonna loop this for a second and make some final tweaks to the sound. good. Nice, I am loving that. It fits so well with the track, and what's so great about working with the drum synth is having that flexibility to really shape it to the song that you're working on versus just flying in samples from wherever and just hoping that they work. Next, I want to get this out as audio so I can just work with it as an audio sample, and this is like my favorite feature of this plugin is the render option. It's so easy. Just click generate, it gives us the waveform, and then we can just export this right to our sample folder. We'll just call it new awesome snare. Save, it goes right to our sample folder, and now we can just fly this in. And there we go. There is our shiny new sample. Let's go ahead and place it on the 2 and the 4. Drop the level. And let's hear it on its own really quick. Yeah, that's nice. And with the track. Yeah, that's sick. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and if you're down for more videos like this one, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, hit me up on my socials. Links are in the description below. I'd love to hear from you. Later.